First of all, thank you all for coming tonight. When I came to Yeshiva College 12 years ago, I had the great good fortune to work for Norman. He was never a boss. Instead, he was immediately and will always be a mentor and dear friend. Tonight's program received enthusiastic, total support from Yeshiva University, and I wish to thank the President's Office, the Office of the Provost, and finally, Yeshiva College's Dean's Office for their help in putting this evening together. Finally, my greatest debt is to Sheila Stein and the Adler family for sharing literally hundreds of emails through this period with thoughts and plans for what this was going to be. And Norman taught at many institutions across America, great institutions. He loved Yeshiva best. Your program's going to list the speakers in order. I'm not going to introduce everyone. They're known perhaps to all of you, but it's fitting. We'll start tonight with President Richard Joel.
Welcome, everybody. Like Sheila said, that we probably waited a few minutes because we half expect Norman to walk in. A little late, but in the right room. And I think there's so much to commemorate and celebrate about a scholar, a teacher, a father, a spouse, but a tremendously loving force. There's so much to talk about, and people will, but I want to talk very briefly on behalf of Yeshiva University in the following way. This week, the Torah portion that we read is interesting and I thought compelling, that God speaks to Avram. And he says, Lech lecha me'artzecha, go out from your land and from your father's home to the land that I will send you, and I will make of you a great nation. And one of the commentators, the Sfas Emes, asks an interesting question. We know almost nothing about Avram before this happened, almost nothing. And the question is asked, what was so special about Avram that from all the people in the world, God chose Avram, and he spoke to Avraham and said, go forth. And the Sfas Emes says, in truth, the voice of God went out to the whole world, went out to everyone. But Avram heard the call, and Avram answered the call. And that was the model of what we should be. Norman Adler spent his life answering the call on a personal and a professional level. And he did it with curiosity, with integrity, with commitment, and with great love. My first contact with Norman was on the phone. I had been associate dean and a professor at Cardozo, spent a lot of my life involved with YU, and then in 1988 we moved to Washington and I assumed the presidency of the Hillel Foundation. I received a phone call from a gentleman, nice friendly fellow, who introduced himself as Norman Adler, and I forget where he got my name, but apparently my reputation was as someone who was very invested in yeshiva and had left and was on the outside. And he said he knew someone who, if he called me, I could tell him the truth. So he had been recruited for the deanship of Yeshiva College. He had had a glowing career to that date. And he was pulled, but he was pulled by others to accept the deanship. And he had some concerns. So he said, I know you know Yeshiva well, and I know you're not invested, thank you, in it. He says, tell me about it, and tell me if I should take this position. I said, well, how can I tell you that unless I know who you are? And we then had a lovely conversation. No, that's not true. I listened for a lot, and Norman told me who he was and what was motivating him and what his academic aspirations were, and frankly, what his philosophic and religious commitments were. And he asked me, because he had heard lots of mixed things about yeshiva. So I talked to him about the mixed things about yeshiva that any of us at that time probably would have said. And when we were done, he said, well, do you think I should take the job? I said, well, I've told you all the challenges you're going to face. Of course you should take the job. So, Sheila, I apologize. I think I urged him to do it, but we were the beneficiaries of it in an unbelievable way. He never looked back. He contributed in so many ways. Others will talk more specifics about it. For me, I have to say that from the very beginning, Norman was my colleague and my friend and a person of wonderful advice. Norman was also a wonderful person who could come into my office and I would stop dealing with Yeshiva University because we talked, or at least he talked great thoughts. And I don't mean that he didn't listen, I was saying he has great thoughts. And there was nothing that he didn't want to be a part of. And when it was time for him to step down as dean, right, he was my full partner in that. This was what he wanted to do. And he always had, and you know this, incredible graciousness, always looking at the cup as half full, always thinking, what else could I add? Always saying, how does Torah inform my science? And how does science inform my Torah? And in every possible way, collaborating with people. But I also have to say, you should all know his focus was on students. There was nothing he wouldn't do. And after he became first assistant provost, and then he was my special advisor, he would always take on projects that would matter. He was committed to an arts festival, this professor of psychology. He was committed to an arts festival, and he endured many things on a philanthropic level to make sure that there would be an arts festival, but he celebrated it because he believed in our students and he believed in the mission of yeshiva, and he knew that that was central to what we had to do. The other thing I just want to point out is, on his own volition, he made himself the advisor for students who were looking to apply for a Rhodes or a Fulbright or for any other scholarship. He was interested in how individuals could really make a mark, and frankly, he felt that our students were spectacular and he wanted the world to know it. And that was Norman. I want to close this way. I had the sad privilege of having a chat with Sheila during Shiva on the phone. And we had a conversation, and something came to me at that time because she was talking to me about something. I just want to share it with you. I told her how much I thought of her, and then Sheila told me, and you'll say if I'm wrong, that they had just recently returned from a trip in Europe because Norman really wanted to see the Alps. And I said, you know, it's funny you say that because I'm reminded of a story that I think is the fitting ongoing tribute to Norman Adler. So the story is told of Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch, that there was a day when his students came upon him on a train in Europe. And the students said, Rebbe, what are you doing? He said, I'm going to Switzerland. He said, well, why are you doing that? He said, let me explain this to you, my students. He says, in 120 years, when I stand before the Kisei HaKavod, when I stand at the heavenly court, and God turns to me and says, Shemshon, did you learn my Torah? I'll be able to say to him, Ribbona Shel Olam, I'm sure I could have done more, but day and night, with all my heart, with all my capacities, I learned your Torah. And my students, I'm not worried when God turns to me and says, Shimshon, did you work on behalf of my people? Because I will be able to say, body and soul, with all my heart, I worked on behalf of your people. And then he turned to his students and said, but my students, what am I going to answer when God turns to me and says, Shimshon, did you see my Alps? So Norman saw the Alps. But more than seeing the Alps, and Norman saw the Alps with Sheila, who was his sacred tour guide through so many years of lustrous life. But Norman didn't only see the Alps, he saw them as God's Alps. And he didn't keep that to himself. He spent his whole life making sure that students would see the Alps, see them as God's Alps, and speculate as to what could be seen from the promontory. The Yehei Zichro Baruch, his memory is a blessing.
Thank you, Richard, for those words. I was asked to speak about Norman's contribution to the faculty, and I'm not sure if I am the best person to do it. So Norman, I will try to continue the conversation we always had, and the conversation that I, and at least I believe many of us, keep running in our head since that morning in September when we heard the news. So I know, and some of you here probably knows, because she was a witness to our conversation sometimes in the phone at 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. She wasn't happy about that. And I will not talk about all your great contributions to science, the fields of psychology that we open and for which you are recognized. We are going to do a conference devoted to that at some point. I do not even want to speak about the great things you did for this school. Richard mentioned some, the honors program, of course, the arts festival, the mentoring, many things that we do now every day and we take for granted, and we're children of your imagination. But let me tell you what I always told you when we started every conversation. Norman, you're crazy, you know. And you will tell me always the same, yes, I know, but you know, as Polonius said, there is a method to this madness, I know. But who else, if you were not crazy, would have not kicked me out of your office when I walked with Tom Otway and spent 15 minutes trying to convince you that we have to buy a boat to teach you the environmental issues and call it the SS Yeshiva and make me go up and down the Hudson. And you took me seriously and you looked into it. That we couldn't do. But when Tom and I came and told you that we wanted to buy a telescope and put it here on the roof and bring the students or take them all the way 100 miles north of the city to get no light pollution in the middle of the night twice a week, you said yes, and we did it actually. And when you asked me many years ago, Gabe, dream the course you want to dream. What if you had everything you needed, what would you do? I said, Norman, I would take my students to Italy. I would walk in the walks of Galileo. I would take them to the houses where he lived. I would sit with them in the Campo in Siena and spend an afternoon just drinking cappuccino and talking about those things and looking at the sun move in the sky among the buildings, or the shade. He said, you think you can do that? I said, I think I can do it. And you helped me and I did it. And probably the best 3 weeks in my life, and from then on I did it many times, came from somebody who believed that we could do, and if we are crazy enough to think of something, we can make it happen. So, Norman, let me tell you, you were a crazy man, and we did not sometimes understand the extent of that, and I have to thank you, because the craziness, the reality in most of us, we try to keep it alive, because this is what's changing us. So you changed in very deep ways my life, as my personal life and my professional life, and I know that in the same way you did for many of us. Thank you, Norman.
I'm Uri Westrich, a former student of Dr. Adler, and I'm very honored to have been asked to say a few words tonight. I guess I just wanted to talk for a couple of minutes, a little bit about my relationship with Dr. Adler, or Norm as he insisted I call him after I graduated, and maybe a couple of his traits that I really was left an impression on me and I was really admire. So I wasn't a psychology major at YU, so I really shouldn't have crossed paths with Dr. Adler, but I was interested in psychology and I heard good things about him, and to be honest, I heard that he was a little bit of a lenient grader. So I figured why not try his class. The first one I took was neuropsychology, and it was a very small class. There's only like 5 of us. And that was when I first really got to know Dr. Adler, and one of the first things that really left an impression on me and I think helped forge our special relationship was the fact that here is this like brilliant scholar, and as I was in his course and actually like Googled him a little bit and found out about some of his past, like realized how impressive his resume really was. But and he was very opinionated also. He wasn't shy to say what he thought about things, but I was actually really struck by how interested he was in what his students had to say. And I was almost taken aback sometimes when he would ask me or other students what we thought about something, and just from the expression on his face and the follow-up questions that he would ask, I really was struck by that. Like, wow, a lot of professors they lecture and they talk to the class, but they don't actually ask and listen in that way. And that was something that really struck me, and I think gave me a lot of confidence, because if Dr. Adler cared what I thought, then what I think is probably somewhat valuable. And he, as President Joel said, he really cared about the students first and foremost, and as many of us, all of us know, he really advocated so strongly for his students in writing recommendations and trying to get them into various scholarships and programs. He was really known for that. But another thing that I wanted to just briefly mention was that even though Norm was opinionated and knew what he thought about things and could seem to be somewhat even cynical and sarcastic sometimes, I realized that he was also actually an extremely sensitive person, and there was one incident that happened that really brought this out. It's not the most pleasant thing to talk about, and I hope it doesn't upset anyone, but there actually was a little bit of a cheating scandal when I was in his class. And basically he found out that a couple of the students in his class had cheated on a midterm. And he was, at that time, I was already pretty close with him, and he spoke to me outside of class and just expressed how just distraught he was, and he was asking my advice on how he should handle it, what he should do. And it was not the easiest situation to deal with. But what ended up happening was he came to class, and we all kind of just had an informal discussion, and he broke down in tears, and he was just so destroyed that his students had betrayed his trust. And to make a long story short, what ended up happening, at least in that setting, was that the perpetrators of the cheating kind of like came forward, and Norm just hugged everybody, and I know that there were other repercussions and difficulties in how he handled it, but that was really his reaction. He just cried and he just hugged everyone, and that's really all it was. But aside from that, and then after I graduated, I really just kept up a really amazing really just friendship with Norm. And part of that, aside, all the academic stuff aside, he was just a lot of fun, and he was very entertaining. Actually, the last contact that I had with him, I actually wrote something on the memorial website about when I bumped into him on campus last spring for a really amazing event that he was very classic for him to have organized. But the last time I was in contact with him was this past Shavuos, and there was another former student of his that he was very close with, Daniel First, who's here. And so the two of us were on this program for Shavuos, and Daniel actually had the really nice idea, let's take a picture and send it to Norm and wish him a good Yontif. And I thought that was very, very cute. And we took the picture and sent it to him. And I was very happy that we did. And just the fact that for me, it had already been a good 7-8 years since I was a student of his, but our friendship was still just as strong because of the respect and admiration that I had for him. And so I just feel very lucky to have known Norm both as a mentor and as a friend.
Dear Sheila and family, colleagues, and friends, we have come together this evening to reflect upon the loss of a very special human being and to celebrate his extraordinary life. At the outset, I wish to express not only my heartfelt condolences to Norm's family, but also my sincere gratitude for sharing with us a website dedicated to his memory. It was difficult for all of us to come to terms with a sense of utter sorrow and bereavement, which we experienced upon learning of Norm's sudden passing. The loss was keenly felt because news of his passing reached us at the start of the fall semester, at a time when we were all looking forward to meeting with Norm, to catch up on his summer escapades, to share personal and academic news, to discuss his latest views, and just to reconnect with a beloved friend, colleague, and mentor. The website, in some small way, enabled all of us to somehow reconnect with Norm in a very meaningful way. The website created a broad community of mourners, a wealth of shared memories, and the recognition that, although we all encountered Norm in our own individual and separate relationships, he was truly the same genuine person whom we all experienced in such familiar ways. The submissions have kept alive the very essence of his personality, his unique character, his many accomplishments, and especially the rich legacy he has left us. Norm and I were faculty members together at the University of Pennsylvania more than 45 years ago, and eventually he became my dean. He assumed deanship of Penn's College at a crucial juncture in the development of Penn's interdisciplinary Jewish studies program, which I had founded a few years earlier. We worked closely together to ensure the success of the program. It was during this period that I first learned of his passion for interdisciplinary education, his love for and deep commitment to Judaism, Jewish scholarship, and Jewish culture, as well as the State of Israel. We did not have much contact during the years in which he served as vice provost at Northeastern University. However, we reconnected upon his assuming the deanship of Yeshiva College, and our relationship solidified once again when I eventually accepted a full-time position at Yeshiva in 2008. I will never forget his constant support, encouragement, sage advice, and deep concern for my well-being and success during my tenure as Dean of Yeshiva College. But instead of recounting serious conversations or humorous incidents or personal anecdotes, I would prefer to return to the website submissions, which I have read and reread during the last few months. Please indulge me as I try to assimilate your submissions and mine in an attempt to turn them into a portrait of a friend who was sorely missed. Norman was bigger than life. He was a brilliant scholar endowed with a soaring intellect and a creative and artistic spirit, who encompassed worlds of different ideas and intuitively grasped the interconnectedness of disciplines. Norman's greatness of mind was combined with a compassionate soul. He intellectually and emotionally understood the greatness of our humanity as well as the frailties of the human condition. He was passionate about what each and every individual could achieve in a lifetime and how great is the impact that we can have upon each other. He also deeply believed in the essential importance of religion in a scientific and materialistic world to cultivate and preserve the divinely endowed human spirit within us. To Norm, life was always wondrous. His curiosity, which was boundless and encompassed all things, was the underlying source of his joy of discovery and his zest for life. But Norm's curiosity was never based on pure intellect. He also observed life emotionally, ranging from heartfelt feelings to zany and even mischievous humor, which added to his charm and appeal. As one faculty member wrote, quote, "Norm's enjoyment of life, of its mysteries, its passions, and its absurdities was contagious," end quote. He led by example, never preaching, but always teaching. Indeed, Norm was a gifted teacher, a recipient of the coveted Lindback Award for Teaching Excellence. All of us who taught courses with him know that his teaching was never frontal. He challenged, coaxed, cajoled his students and his colleagues to reach for more insightful understanding and for a keener appreciation. And like all good teachers, he was always willing to listen and to learn from everyone, including his friends, colleagues, and students, and yes, even from his children, whom he quoted to me in many conversations of the lessons so learned. Norm was devoted to the academy and all it represented. In his lifetime, he contributed so much to the intellectual environments of both the Penn and Yeshiva campuses as dean of both colleges. At Penn, he founded the now flourishing biological basis of behavior major, for which he received the Dana Award for pioneering achievement in higher education. He is recognized as a national figure who spurred the development of the field of neuroscience in undergraduate education. He also initiated the Penn Reading Project, which has been widely adopted as part of the first-year experience at many college campuses. But Norm was even more devoted to the members of the academy, to his students, and to his colleagues. He cared deeply about them and spent hours of thought and energy on how he could best be of help to others. He influenced the careers of generations of students and colleagues, allowing them to pursue opportunities which would help them to successfully attain their desired goals, and more importantly, to help them grow as caring members of society. His concern and kindness knew no bounds. I would like to think that Norm thoroughly enjoyed in a very special way the unique environment of Yeshiva University. It afforded him not only intellectual and spiritual growth, but also the opportunity to teach meaningful courses, bringing together all of his passions, his love of spiritual pursuits, the arts and humanities, religion and psychology. His heart, soul, and intellect reflected the very ideals of yeshiva, keenly aware of the many challenges of such ideals, which he lovingly embraced. He also deeply loved his students at YU and worked selflessly on their behalf. He delighted in being the godfather and in working closely with them. And of course, he delighted in the collegiality of the diverse faculty of Yeshiva University, including its rebbeim, who were his close friends and fellow travelers in his intellectual and spiritual journeys. We all delighted in him, and we believe he also delighted in us. I hope that we all find some degree of solace in the knowledge that Norm Adler, alav hashalom, left this world having made a deep and lasting impact on so many lives. May we keep his memory alive and follow in his ways so that his soul will truly be bound in the souls of the living.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Mark Weingarten, one of Dr. Adler's more recent students, and I hope to build on some of the remarks that were made by President Joel, particularly by Dean Eichler. From my individual perspective, I recognize that that perspective is not necessarily, given Dr. Adler's multifaceted personality, is definitely not an absolute interpretation of Dr. Adler. And in fact, many of his former students are here who may have known him better than I did, or have very different lessons to be taken from Dr. Adler. But I have three reflections. This week we read the story of Abraham, of Avraham Avinu, and the commentaries on the Bible tell us that the reason why Abraham was called the Ivri, the Hebrew, is because all of the world stood on one side and Abraham stood on the other. And I think that this message is very much applicable to the legacy of Dr. Adler. That on the one hand, he was a brilliant scientist. He had a legacy that is almost world-renowned on the internet, across campuses in this country and abroad, as being a pioneer in higher education. He was someone who dedicated his early life and his early career to many Ivy League schools, to advancing and to exploring the frontiers of science. But on the other hand, there was an ontological anxiety almost. There was something that continued, as he expressed to me, to always gnaw at him. The knowledge that perhaps there was something else in his life. There was something else that defied the empiricism of the laboratory. And that something else was his Jewish heritage, or the yeshiva component of his life. And just like Abraham stood on one side of the river as the entire world stood on the other, so too Dr. Adler throughout his life was able to make decisions and make commitments that from a pure resume perspective may have seemed to be illogical. But from a spiritual perspective, from a personal perspective, to those who knew him made so much sense. That he was willing to give up perhaps a position at one of the world's greatest universities, to come to yeshiva, to come with his dedication, with his enthusiasm, to a different goal, to advance a different motif, even as he remained true to his research and to his psychology. And even while here at yeshiva, that authenticity, that willingness to be true to who he really was and to his background and to his heritage came through both in the dialectic, in the way he taught the interface between psychology and religion, which was the course for which I was his student, as we learned about the nuances and how one can relate to what different religions had to offer in terms of enhancing the human psyche, with the background, the lessons that we can glean outside of the walls of the Beit Midrash, of the Beis Medrash, but also in terms of enhancing that dialectic and what religion could contribute to science in a way that was often unexplored. And that dialectic also could be found in Dr. Adler's personal experiences with his balance between the traditional Lithuanian method of learning Talmud and also his love for Chassidut, for what we would call, I guess, the logos and mythos aspects of Judaism, the intellectual and rational aspects, but also the emotional and spiritual aspects. And I think that that balance and that dichotomy and the possibility to pursue both, even in what is considered to be a very traditional Talmud-oriented yeshiva at Yeshiva College, was something that he very much conveyed to us as his students, and he very much sought to convince us and to invoke within us a love for that balance, a love for that dichotomy, and the knowledge that a person could be the synthesis of not only the Jewish world and the academic world, the Jewish world and the secular world, but also could become the synthesis of those two aspects of the person, of the emotional intelligence as well as the intellectual intelligence. And the other thing, another lesson that we learn from Abraham is his kindness and his dedication. Despite the fact that Abraham really is credited for starting the world's monotheistic traditions, in Talmudic literature and in the commentaries, he's most noted for his kindness. And the kindness and dedication of Dr. Adler to his students was really unparalleled. He would call myself and many of my peers often at 1, 2 o'clock in the morning with his latest explanation of Dostoevsky, his latest career advice, and he really exceeded the boundaries of what would be expected from a normal faculty-student relationship. And that dedication was something that continued throughout his life, even to myself, where as I mentioned earlier, I was really one of his last students in really the very end of his teaching career. And just like Abraham, we know that he gave birth to Isaac when he was 100 years old. So too, even at Dr. Adler's at the twilight of his career, at the twilight of his life, he still sought to have new children, and he still sought to spread his influence and to spread his ideas and to inspire a new generation of students, even as he struggled to come to class, and he struggled with being unwell, and he struggled with so many things. He still made it his priority to come every day as often as he could, and if he couldn't come to lecture on the phone, to call us individually, to make sure that we were able to succeed in our dreams and that he could encourage them to the greatest extent possible. And with that notion in mind, that notion of being able to continue to have children even at age 100, I was very shocked when I heard the news of Dr. Adler's passing, because it really appeared to me that he really is timeless, that he was never the kind of person that one would expect just would not wake up the next morning. That one always thought of Dr. Adler as really not only as a person, but as an idea, and as an idea that is infinite, an idea and a legacy that really cannot die and cannot be overtaken. And his, as we mentioned, the authenticity, the dedication, the kindness, and that sense of timelessness to one's values is something that he very much instilled in us and his students, and I think is something that will enable us to carry his memory into the future and to enable it to continue to remain timeless. Thank you.
Dear Norm, I've had so many things I wanted to discuss with you over the summer, but you were in Israel, and somehow email just didn't cut it. Then you left us so abruptly. Want to share a ride home with a car service so I can at last talk with you? No, forget about the coupons. This time it's on me. Anyway, it's a metaphorical ride, but you know that. Thank you so much for the book on Leonard Cohen. I just got Cohen's latest release. It would really speak to you. I found it particularly interesting that the book concentrates on the song Hallelujah. I've heard there was a secret chord that David played to please the Lord. But you don't really care for music, do you? You know it by heart. It goes like this. the fourth, the fifth, the minor fall, the major lift, the baffled king composing hallelujah. Wonderful. I always love to hear you sing. Let me continue. The author argues that hallelujah became a universal standard because everyone could sing it, everyone could make it his own. This made me think of the role of music in your life. You sing beautifully, you play piano, you love your upright like a member of the family. You use music as a psychologist to heal the infirm, the dislocated, the disenchanted. You understand that music is a universal language that everyone understands, that touches the soul. Recently, I read an article on the role of music in primitive tribes. In these tribes, people sang together as they worked, as they journeyed, as they played, when they worshiped. Through music, people bonded and were soothed, nurtured, and restored. This reminded me of one of the most memorable evenings I have spent at Yeshiva University that you helped organize. It explored with videos the ability of music to energize the aged, to revitalize the infirm, and soothe the distraught. That evening left me a changed person. Imagine if workers today sang in the assembly room, sang while driving buses, in corporate cubicles. Rather, silence is our collective persona. Music is confined to delegated spaces. We have become collective mutes despite all the noise around us. We toil silently, we suffer silently, we rejoice silently, we listen silently through our earphones. No wonder that rebellion takes the form of collective rock concerts. It's a cold and it's a broken hallelujah. As a musician of the soul, you tended to the emotionally fragile, ministering to them as a sensitive doctor. As a musician of the soul, you uplifted the peripheral, recognizing talents not yet appreciated and including them in the group. As a musician of the soul, you helped create community by introducing the disconnected to each other, by embracing the sidelined. As a professor, as a dean, you use the music of your soul to enrich, to bind, to inspire, to recognize the individual. You were a very special dean indeed. You loved your faculty. You knew their individual merits as well as their human foibles. And if I may add parenthetically, we loved you in return with all your foibles. You orchestrated us faculty like the skilled maestro you were into a grand pedagogical extravaganza filled with book projects featuring world-famous writers like Salman Rushdie, as well as art exhibits of student works. That was a singular golden era, a meteoric symphony, never to return after your deanship. During this past Sukkot, I heard several references to the idea that the message of Sukkot is that life is all about the journey, the process. In other words, the way we create or compose our lives, like a canvas or a musical score, the minor fall, the major lift. How well you understood that life is all about the journey, making that journey a composition that resonates. I think this is your message to us. Your own journey was quite remarkable. You kept the faith, writing in your inscription to me in the Cohen book that though that seed of earthly bliss be failed, a fairer paradise is founded now, paradise regained. In your own life, you turned what might have been a cacophony of sound into a soaring melody of fulfillment and accomplishment. What finer journey could there be? Oh, here we are. We've reached your place. Careful now. Watch your step getting out. No, 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 I don't need the coupons. Thanks again for the book and for letting me bend your ear. Next time, it's your turn. Shalom, Chaver.
I am honored to speak in celebration of my big brother Norman. I wanted to thank, before I go any further, Dr. Sugarman for all your help with this, President Joel, and the YU Associates for really arranging for this beautiful memorial tonight. Norman's passions and dedications, family, music, his work, his community, his friends. He loved us all and he was there for us. As far as scholarship and success, many other speakers had mentioned this, but I will say that he had a special relationship with an undergraduate teacher as he was an undergraduate at Harvard with Paul Rosen. Paul became a lifelong friend to Norm. As a matter of fact, Paul has arranged for a memorial at the University of Pennsylvania this month, and I'm delighted that Paul is here tonight. Norm's infectious sense of humor. You all knew him. Nobody could tell a joke like Norm. I really mean that. Whenever he got to a punchline, can you hear me better? Whenever he got to a punchline, he would laugh his way through it. Try doing that when he had hearing aids, I had hearing aids, and we're both flipping through this thing. He would repeat these things often and laugh. He loved life, and he shared that. I'm going to go back to the early days in Chicago, because when Fred asked me to speak on Norman, this had to be personal and music. You know it has to be. On Chappelle, I was around age 6. Norm around age 15. He put me on his lap at the piano, and I don't remember this. He said that he wanted to see if I could listen carefully, and he played a Bach invention for me. And he asked me, can I play the same invention? He said that I did. He slammed the lid down, and he shouted out to our mother, Mom, Jimmy's going into music, I'm going into science. He reminded me of that last year, as a matter of fact. Graduate studies at Berkeley with Frank Beach, one of the founders of the study of hormones and behavior. Dr. Beach demonstrated how these hormones and behaviors intermingled. I was a scared young kid around 15, off one of my first trips, and he said, oh, I want you to meet Dr. Beach. He said, call me Frank. And he flexed his arm with that lady with lady parts blinking back. That was probably a very good example of Norman's sense of humor and also Frank Beach. They really met on the same plane on that. When I got home to the house, Brahms was playing. He was studying his head off at the time. He brought us to a combination harpsichord and organ recital. And I said, oh, that was interesting. He replied, what do you mean? The harpsichordist messed that whole thing up, but he was okay with organ. He was passionate in his opinions, and he was knowledgeable. We stopped, by the way, we had to stop at the lab. I won't forget this one. We stopped at the lab because he had to go and tend to, as he put it, his, let's just say, expletive rats. And then we're in there, we're dealing with rats. I was hungry, I just arrived, I wanted to go home. He said, oh, wait, you're in music. He said, we have this in common. He said, we both deal with rats. Curtis of Juilliard for me. This is spring of 1969. Wasn't sure I wanted to be in New York. I really wanted to be in Philadelphia. He would not try to influence that decision. I knew he wanted me there, and I wanted to be close to there. Because as a matter of fact, that year that I auditioned, my niece Shira had just been born. So I wanted to be part of that family then. Many times Norman would travel out to attend a concert. As a matter of fact, even as late as the summer, we would write to each other. If you saw us on Facebook, he would say, hey, little bro, and I would sign big bro. This got to be a running joke with us. But the funniest thing, for those of you whom Norman introduced me to you, he would say, I want you to meet my baby brother. This is James. Jim, Jimmy, James. And this litany would go on, wash, rinse, and repeat. And I'd finally say, Norm, pick one. This one, I reminded him of it this summer. But something else. Oh, the Atlanta premiere. I was asked to write a very large piece. It was an AIDS requiem. It's about 72 minutes, not an easy set, by the way. And Norman was fascinated with religions and comparative religions. And he asked me, what music am I putting in there? What text? And he started reciting the Roman Catholic Mass by heart. I said, oh. He said, movement 3, the Recordare, which means remembrance. He said, what are you going to use for that? He said, how about something from our own heritage? Movement 3 of my requiem is Yeskor Elohim. He was right. He was influencing my music throughout. When our brother Michael had just passed away, he came back to New York a little later than I did. And then Sheila and Norm invited me up for a Shabbat dinner. And if those of you who know Sheila does a divine Shabbat dinner. It's festive and always special. First, he wanted me to go and meet his rabbi. And we had just gotten back, and the next thing I knew, the rabbi walks out, puts one arm on my shoulder, one arm on Norman's shoulder, and said, oh, if it isn't the Brothers Grimm. So it was a blessing that this rabbi also officiated at Norm's final funeral, his funeral in Jerusalem. I reminded him of that rabbi. Norm helped a friend of mine, gave me permission to use his name. This friend of mine, Frankie, was asking me to write a letter of reference for his master's at Temple University, master's in social work. I did that, and Norm, ever the scholar, said, what are you going to say? He knows Frankie. And I showed it to him, and he just trashed it, took it apart. He says, all wrong. You have to do it this way. You've got to be his mentor. Come on. This is what they're going to look for. Use these words. He said, better yet, I'd like to talk with Frankie. So the two of them spoke, and he was still orchestrating it. As busy as he was raising money from the Arts Festival, he had a little film to try to help get on here. He still took time that he cared so deeply. That was Norm. With the students and everybody related, that was absolutely. His last week, I had just gone back to school at St. Peter's, and I posted on Facebook, New Beginnings. Norm wrote, that was the Tuesday before he passed, and all he wrote was, an die Musik, to music, because whenever I would kvetch and talk about things, he said, well, get back to the piano, go write, go play. So with Norm, always an die Musik, to the music. The funeral in Jerusalem, getting there is still surreal. Scott and I were flying over that Saturday night, and my brother Stuart, our brother, and Linda were on the same plane. Shira, I think, was already here. His daughter, Tog, was on his way. It was surreal. We arrived in Jerusalem 24 hours away, most of us, and we didn't make it there in time to see him, but we were there for his final passing, for the funeral. And what a blessing. It was done in the Orthodox tradition, and he would have loved it. I would say that in closing, oh no, I have to add this. Sheila's visit. About two and a half weeks ago, Sheila came by to visit with us in the village, and she brought a very heavy, incredible sack of music and tapes and things that go back many, many years. And I'd asked her, is there a score of Debussy in there? Bingo. That Debussy arabesque that I remember Norm playing when he was 15 years old is in there, with his notes on it. Copious, detailed notes in pencil. That is the edition that I will be using in my performances this year with a tribute to Norman. In that collection, I found a song that I composed with Norman and Shira in mind. I found the edition. We'll be using that when Shira performs, Cantor Shira Adler performs with me in April at Yamaha. So in closing, it's sadness, yes. With appreciation and joy and great love for Norman, big brother, mentor, husband, friend, and a great deal of held a great deal of love for this community. As I'd occasionally call him Normie when he let me, I would say that he was humorous, deep scholar, lover of ancient contemporary music. Leonard Cohen sent me that same Hallelujah, that very same piece, and said, "What do you think of this? Can you do something with this?" No, it's under copyright. Anyway, good traveling, good food, good traveling, a wonderful, blessed life with Sheila. Loving big brother, an die Musik. Alav Shalom. Thank you very much.
Listening to the really wonderful and respectful and honorable words that I've listened to, and seeing the people sitting here and seeing the people that stood up here and all the relationships, it hit me that I'm really privileged to have had 3 unique relationships, different relationships with Norm. Almost 20 years ago, I think I was taking my senior finals in this room. It was Norm's first year as dean, and as I was never in his class as a student, so he wasn't giving classes yet, but I remember that I was an English major, and I signed up for and started taking a playwriting course. There were 2 of us in this playwriting course, and then there was one of us, the other one dropped out, and I was sitting there and I was enjoying it. It was an interesting one-on-one. I didn't know colleges did this, that you could have a one-on-one course. And 3 years later, Norm and I were talking, and you know that smirk, that little glint that he has, it's a little bit more than that. And he says, "You know how you had that course, right?" I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He said, "No, you don't normally have one-on-one courses in college." And then that smirk, and then it dawned on me, he was courting my mother at the time, so that helped. But he would never have said, "Wait a second, just because there's one person in the course, I should close it." He said, "I did that. That's why you had that course." So as a student was my first relationship with Norm. Being the rabbi of the family, somehow I was the unofficial rabbinic authority. He always said, "But you're my rabbi." I always said, "No, I'm not." As many times as he said yes, I said no. Where in the beginning, when he was looking to discover more deeply the observant lifestyle, he would ask me questions, some basic questions. We used to discuss Torah, one of his favorite psukim that we actually wrote in a dedication on Tanakh that we gave him on his 75th birthday. The family gave it to him, reflecting really, truly his beautiful dedication to Torah. We were always impressed that he would synthesize the two. We would understand one side of what he said in the Torah, the other side we sort of had to smile and assume he had enough students that were getting it, and he was pleased with that. But the penultimate pasuk in Kohelet, Sof davar hakol nishma et Elokim yirav et mitzotav shemor kizeh kol ha'adam, and Norm and I would go back and forth. I would usually take the intellectual path, and he would try to convince me of the emotional path. I would laugh it off. He would be kind about it. But we would discuss. So there was always, just remembering that even the last time I saw him on the hospital bed, my wife and I were there with him. My wife was holding his hand, and the question of intubation came up, and he would keep turning to me and saying, "So what should I do?" And again, I would say, "I'm not your rabbi." He said, "No, what should I do? You know. You know me. You're the only one that really listens to me. You get me." So I never had to answer that question, but it was a constant relationship that we had. He reveled in it, and I enjoyed it. And the third relationship that I had, of course, was the family. One of 3 stepsons and stepdaughters-in-law and so on. And it's interesting, there were these gifts that he would often feel we needed. Right? They turned from gifts, things that we would have desired, to things that, oh, we need that. My wife is a bibliophile, so she said, well, she has to have a Kindle. And she would say, no, I don't. I really like the books. I like them. No, you have to have a Kindle. And then we had a Kindle. My sons needed toy bugs because every child obviously needs toy bugs. So we had toy bugs. We had a fish tank because every home seemingly needed a fish tank. So he playfully went to the store and priced it out, then said, okay, and he called us to the store. He had imagined a fishbowl with one fish. And while we were there, it evolved into a tank, 20 different fish, coral, and he was very happy to have paid the first fifth of it. So that gift turned into an interesting, let's call it inspiration, and that's where it ended. It's on our counter. We are definitely reminded of Norm with one fish and the other 35 that had repopulated and so on. We sort of don't attribute to him, but it was a mix and it's inspiring. And of course, in the home that my mother and Norm bought in Yerushalayim has a very large garden. And one of his favorite things was to sit in the garden and watch my two sons play around there. And I don't know if you know that sound that he makes, sort of a chuckle, it's like a grunt of satisfaction. But every so often he'd sit there and I'd hear it echo off the fence in the garden, because he would just revel in sitting in a chair and watching my sons run around in his garden. That's all he needed, right? The interaction of picking up a dead roach, which my 3-year-old loves to recount. Remember when Norm picked up the roach? I say, yeah. And then he'd want to do the same thing. I say, Norm did that. We don't do that. It was hard to explain. But they pick up dead things as some kind of devotion to where they all learned it. So that was the family aspect. And the thing is, bottom line, whatever the relationship, whether it was student, it wouldn't matter. He could never understand how a student could be denied something he wanted to learn, so there were no boundaries there. And whether the chavruta, whether the peer, even if I was inferior in using brain cells or years or experience, he always treated me like, oh, we have something to discuss here. We were really learning together, despite certainly my novice experience. And whether it was as a stepson, and he couldn't even see the step part. It wasn't part of his category. You were family, you were son, that was dedication. Bottom line, at the end of the day, no matter what the relationship, no matter what the role, there was always that unwavering passion and that sincerity and that love. And that's what I and our family will truly remember. And that's the man, for sure, that we are remembering and honoring tonight. Thank you.
To all our speakers, our deepest thanks. There is a reception that all of you are welcome to stay for. Talk to Sheila, talk to the family, and let's talk about Norman, who we love so much. Thank you again.